Yeah, John set me up. Yeah, he's good.
Welcome everybody to SoulFood tonight. Tonight is a talk dedicated to the re-signing of feelings. This is just open up the topic of what is on the current edge of science and how to define to our awakening. And we dedicate a night a month to this topic. So just welcome back, John.
Thanks, Clint. It's always fun to be here and be in this beautiful space and have wonderful soul food books to put their arms around us and provide us with this opportunity. So this is fun. So tonight is DNA is Not Your Destiny. And it's third in a series of talks that will focus around a particular subject, and then hopefully we can have a wonderful discussion afterwards, and we'll get to exchange some ideas and information, and maybe you'll walk away with something that might be useful for you. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. And I want to see everybody, so I'm facing the wrong way. Okay, so let's go back to before Newton, back to Descartes. And Descartes was the first one to describe body and mind as two separate entities. And then along came Newton, and he was able to predict where the planetary bodies would go to. And so he became known for describing the universe as something that you could take apart into pieces and describe mechanically. So the universe became just an assembly of parts. And then people started wondering, well, what about the human body? What makes the human body work? And they thought, well, if Newton could describe things as pieces, which is called mechanics or mechanistic approach, then you could take that into a materialism and by describing how the pieces work, you can figure out how to control what the mechanism is. So, let's see. Well, back to the human body. Well, how does the human body work? Well, let's look at gross anatomy. We've got arms and legs and eyeballs and ears. But how do each of those work? Well, let's take them apart. That's the Newtonian way. We'll take apart the ears and figure out how they work, and the arms and the heart and the skeletal system. But then we really don't have what controls the body. We haven't found it yet. So let's look a little bit deeper and get out the microscope. And then we find cells and tissues. And looking at cells and tissues still does not tell us how the body works, what controls the body. We've got a little bit more information, but we do not yet know what really controls things. Okay, so let's get out the microscope and look at cells. Well, it wasn't until 1944 when Avery, McLeod, and McClint found that actually chromosomes control the cells. That's where the hereditary factor is. What they did was they got out some petri dishes and put bacteria in them. And they decided to take part of a nucleus of a cell, which they observed the nucleus actually broke down when a cell divided. And chromosomes that you could see became visible in a microscope, and half of the chromosomes went to one daughter cell and half went to the other. So in 1944, they decided to take these chromosomes and figure out what part of that contained the controlling factor to cells? Well, they discovered that the chromosomes were made of protein and something called nucleic acid. Well, let's look at protein first. Well, what is protein made of? Well, it's made of a string of 20 amino acids. Well, these beads, each one of them different, each one of them is a different amino acid, makes up these big molecules of proteins. But what makes over 100,000 different proteins in the body one different from the other? Well, it's the sequence of the string of proteins or amino acids that make each protein different from the other. So you've got these 20 different types of amino acids are making very complex proteins, and that creates most of the structure of the body. Well, if you look at the chromosomes, they contain protein and they contain a new structure, a new molecule called nucleic acid. Well, what are the characteristics of nucleic acid? We don't know yet. So they took proteins and nucleic acid and put some in a dish, the protein in a dish with bacteria A. And they took the nucleic acid and put it in another dish with bacteria A. No change. So they took the nucleic acid and the protein from bacteria A, separated them, and put them in petri dishes with bacteria B. Well, the protein from bacteria A had no effect on bacteria B. So that didn't contain the hereditary protein or the hereditary material. But when they looked at the petri dish of bacteria B that contained the nucleic acid from bacteria A, they found that bacteria B started exhibiting the characteristics of bacteria A. So that's how they discovered that nucleic acid contained hereditary material, the blueprints for making proteins. Okay, so we're a little bit further along. Then just 9 years later, Watson and Crick came along and described the shape of the DNA double helix molecule. And they said nucleic acid is made of also individual components, and this time there's only 4. There's not 20, there's only 4, and they're called bases. And these 4 bases act as the blueprint to make all of the proteins in a body. Are you with me? Okay. So we've got Watson and Crick in 1953 or 54 describing the DNA molecule for the first time. Well, then Crick comes up with a theory that, okay, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the blueprint. Well, then there's another thing that goes onto the DNA called RNA, which is like a Xerox copy. And this is what then makes the protein. Okay, so we've got DNA to RNA to protein. Actually, the RNA goes in and out of the nucleus, goes into the nucleus, copies the DNA, out of the nucleus, makes protein. Okay, so far so good? We're making protein. So Francis Crick called this the central dogma. And the central dogma means DNA, RNA, protein, one direction. Wow. This is not so good. Why not? Doesn't go the other way. There's no room in the theory for the environment which affects the body to affect the DNA. So now we're saying, oh, this is a real pickle we're in. That means that my DNA makes protein. Okay, we got that. And that accounts for all my physical body and my behavior. But what about my environment? Can't do anything about that, according to the central dogma. So does that mean if I eat vegetables instead of Fritos, doesn't matter, I'm still going to get a heart attack? Does that mean that if I exercise and do wonderful things for my body, I'm still going to get cancer? Ooh. Well, let's go back a little bit. And we'll say, okay, let's adopt the central dogma and say it's correct. Well, what affects proteins? It's signals from the environment. Okay, we can accept that, signals from the environment. Oh, the chemical industry says we can make signals. We've got lots of signals we can make. That's our business. We'll just create a big pharmaceutical industry. We'll control all the signals, which will control the proteins, which will control your physical body and your behavior. Cool. So they created this wonderful thing called the Human Genome Project. Have you all heard of that? Okay, that started, the Human Genome Project started in the 1980s. And it was the rescuer of our frail DNA because it was going to give us a way to control our biology and our behavior if it was broken. So, okay, Human Genome Project. Well, what's that all about? Well, it's a big effort by a bunch of venture capitalists who came up with this idea, and they thought, well, if there's 100,000 proteins, actually 300,000 proteins, different proteins, all unique, in the human body, if we figure out how to make them, we can control everything, and no one will be ill. Well, it was a good premise. But the venture capitalists, of course, being venture capitalists, had something else in mind. So they convinced the public to pay for this project of defining all of the genes in the human genome, which means every grouping of DNA that made a protein. So this finally concluded in the early 2000s, I think it was 2001. And what they found was a cosmic joke. And the joke was that although the venture capitalists thought this would be a highly profitable thing for them to do, they only found 23,000 genes that made a specific protein. So you ask, well, what happened to the other 300 of the 300,000? How did you get from 23,000 genes to over 300,000 molecules and proteins within the human body? Well, the way that you get there is that every single gene can make up to 30,000 different products. Well, how do you get there? It's based on your environment. So, this is the new science of medicine. So out of this came a whole new science based on quantum physics. And that put the mind back into the body, which Newton took out. So you marry quantum physics and the new biology, and you say, well, what's happening in the mind? It's energy. It turns out that physical signals affect the proteins in the body, in the cells, but energy, signals from the mind, are much, much stronger. So what does the biochemical field do? They poo-poo energy medicine. Now, energy medicine is less expensive in many cases, more effective and safer than chemical medicine. And the chemical industry is huge. Of the Fortune 500 companies, the top 10 are pharmaceutical companies, and their net profits are greater than the other 490. The top 10 of the Fortune 500 profits are greater than the other 490. So it's a highly profitable business. But the writing is on the wall. Energy medicine is now the new way that people are finding that it's much more effective for their bodies to be influenced with. So what does this look like? Well, there is an influence called the placebo effect, which many of us have been taught is something to be disregarded or minimalized. And the placebo effect is actually more powerful than many of the drugs that are currently on the market. If we can teach our bodies to release the power that causes spontaneous healing or healing in general, wouldn't that be something? We could take our power back from the medical community. Okay, so there's also something called the nocebo effect. The nocebo effect means negative thinking can affect our bodies. And there's well-documented evidence that people are told they'll have 4 months to live and they die right on time. Or people who are given mistaken diagnoses that end up having problems from something that doesn't even exist. On the other hand, in 2005, in the Journal of American Medicine, there was a hospital and a particular doctor who did over 1,000 surgeries, knee surgeries, and he divided, unbeknownst to his patients, he divided them into 3 groups. One group, he would go in and he'd actually scrape out their knees. They all had severe knee pain, incapacitating knee pain. And the second group, he would go in and just irrigate it, just swish it out and try and get whatever it is that he thought was a problem out with liquids. And a third group, he made the same incisions, went under the same preparations, and he went through all the same noises in the operation room as if he was irrigating the knee, but he didn't do anything other than make the decisions and sew them back, incisions and sew them back up. Well, they followed the recovery of these over 100,000 patients, and the conclusion was there was no difference. They had the same amount of recovery in all of them. They had the same amount of rehabilitation that they needed, the same amount of exercise and physical therapy. So the doctor went from the beginning of that experiment highly convinced that his procedures were effective. They helped his patients, that they needed him, otherwise they would not be able to improve their health. And at the conclusion of this experiment, he stated that he had no effect on his patients. And actually, by convincing them that they needed the surgery, it was detrimental to them, where they could have recovered simply by the suggestion that they had that ability for themselves. Okay, so now we get to the premise of the talk. which is, what does this have to do if you're pregnant? What does this information have to do if you're raising children? Or even just for yourself? Your minds are very, very powerful. More powerful than you can possibly imagine. And every second, hundreds of thousands of chemicals are being created in your body. And these chemicals, as you've learned, from 23,000 genes to one gene to over 30,000 chemicals or molecules can be created from one gene. Imagine what each thought does every second to your body. So it's not as much what's in your body physically as what your mind is thinking. And we've also learned that we are all connected. That's the new biology, the new physics. Quantum physics says there is no separation. We're all connected through the matrix. So that I'm being influenced by Mary and Clint and Kim. We're all being influenced by the machine that's going on right now, the grinder. We're being influenced by the thoughts that are in our environment as well as other energies. So if we are following the teachings of Jesus and Buddha and the wisdom of the ages, which is to control your thoughts, then we will find the perfect health. So, yeah. So at this point, I'm going to open it to discussion. So the next talk will be about specific ways that you can focus your mind. But right now, I'd like to hear what you're thinking. Because it affects all of us. Anybody have a comment or a question? Yeah. Hold on. Okay.
I heard somebody, excuse me, speak about radical realization. And I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's the ability to realize that things happen for a reason, regardless of what it is. And you can create your own sickness by that, and I've done that, just by things that happen, things that I see in the news, things that have happened in my lifetime and stuff like that. But if you can be able to come to realize that things happen for a reason, you can work your way through it. I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but I'm still working on it, and I really like to do that.
I'm still working on it too.
Yeah. If things happen for a reason, then and you can't see it immediately, then you can get the idea that it might be energetically. And perhaps changing the way you look at it or changing something else in your environment might be able to influence it in a positive direction. And since our thoughts are very powerful, if we're able to change our thoughts, for example, one of the things that I like to do, occasionally I have problems with my body. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. So one of the recent things I had was a problem with my knee. And I just say to myself, if I would in my past have categorized it as a problem with my knee, I just say, oh, there's my body healing itself. And my knee isn't a problem. But by reminding yourself that you have a problem with a part of your body, it reinforces the problem rather than ignoring it and sending it a healing thought or a thought that, oh, it's really a healthy part. It's just a little glitch that's showing up right now. So that's worked for me. I've had the good fortune not to have something really major go on. So that would be a test, which I'm not calling to myself. But yeah. Who else? You?
That's interesting to have that discussion about thought affecting personal life. Because so much of what happens because we're communal. Like the whole phenomena of a cancer. You never hear about anybody talking about the level of pollutions and pesticides and man-made chemicals that are in our environment right now. And today was a meditation of homelessness, trying to sell real change. And I know I'm a really different vendor than a lot of vendors because I don't feel like I'm homeless. I don't feel like I'm without or I'm really super needy. But I wonder about all the people who walk by and don't want to look at me. And I wonder about, what does it work on a personal level to think positive thoughts when a whole society level has this huge distance between needs and people who don't have anything. And there's just as much dysfunction with people who have too much as there is people who have too little. Because that big gap causes a lot of illness itself. So that's a really interesting thing. You can do something for personal life and feel really healthy personally, but how does that affect the whole system itself? I think particularly as Americans, we have a whole distance from the suffering that's going on in the rest of our globe, not just peoples, but also animals, our plants, and just disappearing species. So that's all really interesting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Part of the reason that we can feel separate from someone else is because of the flawed premise that's based on Newton, that we're all separate. And once we reclaim the fact that there is no separation, that we cannot possibly separate ourselves from anything else in our environment, in the entire universe, that then those things will start to heal themselves. But right now, there's many of us who are under the premise that I'm separate from you, and you're separate from the animals and the plants, and what affects one will not affect everything, which is wrong. Yeah. Anybody else?
It was just a thought that I too have had a little problem with my knee. So I opened Louise Hay's little book, and in her little book says knee has to do with ego. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And the right side of my body, it's one of those, oh, shh, Also that the right side of the body, being because I'm a body worker, is masculine, and it's the side that gives versus the side that receives, which is feminine. And so it gives me something that I get to look at. But now, for a while, I kind of dreaded going upstairs because it was so uncomfortable. But now, I just say, oh, hi, I love you so much, and I go on, and my knee's been getting better every day. So it's just changing my whole way of looking at it. Just like you said, it really works. Yeah.
Thank you. So anyone else? Yeah.
It was just interesting hearing you talk about how thoughts can change the body, and I remembered this study that I saw, and they were studying the way the brain works, and there was a Tibetan monk that they studied who had, you might have even read about this study yourself already, but he had meditated on compassion every day for years and years and years and years, and that was his calling, was compassion, and so he meditated on compassion daily, and they were able to measure his brain activity, and they would have him hooked up, and they would play different sounds or scenes. And one of the ones I remember from this study was that they played the sound of a woman screaming, and when he heard it, his brain lit up in the compassion area, and that was the only area of his brain that was stimulated. But when all the other subjects from a cross-section of the population were exposed to the same sound, their fear sensors lit up that part of their brain was stimulated. So he had trained himself through meditation to, instead of being afraid when he heard someone in danger, to feel only compassion for them. And I just thought that was so cool that he'd changed the way his mind worked, physically too.
Well, I had the privilege of meeting the Dalai Lama, shaking his hand last month, and spending a weekend with him, which was very powerful. But his central message is compassion, and his belief is that when you're a child, he recalls when he was a child, he learned compassion from his mother. And unless we learn compassion when we're very young, we'll grow up to be mischievous. And so his central mission is to bring compassion into our lives, because that will connect us to one another, and it will heal everything in the earth. It'll heal nature. It'll heal the problems that we have. I can't think of anything that would not be healed with compassion. Yeah?
Yeah, I just read about cultivated compassion as part of Buddhist psychology. And the idea is that instead of feeling compassion where we feel the other person's pain, that will just kind of increase our own personal suffering. But instead we should see the other person as an equal, where that, well, you suffer and I suffer, and this equality that we share is really the cultivated compassion that Buddhism is promoting.
I'd like to also piggyback on one of the things that you mentioned about the meditating monks. Some of the examples of mind or energy affecting the world is there was a study, and I don't have the exact details with me, but I can get it if you're interested. They came to a town where there was high crime, and they meditated specifically on having peace in that area. And it was very measurable that the crime actually went down during the period of time that they meditated, and when they stopped, it went back up again. So there's all sorts of studies that are out, which I'll bring to the forward the next discussion, that show that your mind is very powerful, and group mind is even more powerful. I'll leave one more thought with you. I studied with a man named Adam Dream Healer. That's not his real name, but that's what he goes by, at a workshop last fall. Do you know Edgar Mitchell, the guy who started the Noetic Science Foundation? He was an astronaut, and he was in Florida, and he was diagnosed with some major illness. And Adam Dream Healer at the time was 14 and living in BC. And over the course of a few months, Adam would send specific healing thoughts to Edgar. And he ended up being totally relieved of whatever this problem was. Adam just graduated from college this past fall, or spring, and he's now in naturopathy school. But he has a website, and I signed up for it. And a few months ago, he had a woman in BC who had those electrodes all over her head that measure brain activity. And he had all of the people who were signed up to his website, tens of thousands of people, at one specific 10-minute point in time, all send energy to her or a thought to her, specifically stating that it would affect her brain waves. And they showed the difference in brain activity beforehand, which had lots of different lines connecting different points on the electrodes on the outside of her head. And during that 10-minute period, there was just one line. So she said she felt an incredible amount of cohesion and clarity during that period of time. The next experiment will actually be, they'll have someone ill who everyone will then put their mind on to try and affect this person's illness or heal it. So experiments are ongoing, and we're right on the leading edge of science right now with mind and healing. So it's a pretty fun spot to be. Oh, yeah, what I do. I have a master's in cell biology and genetics, and I was part of a research team, a Nobel laureate team at Yale Medical School for many years, doing electron microscopy as part of that team. And I haven't been in that field for a while, and I started looking into what's going on. And I came across the field of quantum physics. And as part of that research, I attended a few workshops last year just to prove to myself that all of the people who were attending them were crazy. And I found myself sitting next to one person who was an MD from Mongolia, a wonderful elder gentleman whose job it was to travel the world and bring back new technologies for his 500 staff at the hospital that he is in charge of. And we both decided the very first day that we would be gone at the end of the day after proving to ourselves that energy medicine, this particular type of work that we were there to explore, was not real. We ended up staying for the full 5 days. And now I do this particular type of work, which contains not only energy medicine, but energy, light, and information. And so I have a full-time practice that's thriving in Duval. And it's an incredible place to be. I don't do it. It's between my client and the universe, God, whatever you call it. But I have people come back and tell me that remarkable things have happened to them. So it's like being a fly on the wall for God, you know. It's called reconnection. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mary. Yeah, and so I have some cards here and up on the front there, and also here, so if you'd like to pick one up, you're welcome to. I'm done. Unless there's something else? Yeah?
Is that Eric Pearl's?
Eric Pearl, yes. Eric Pearl wrote a book, Heal Others, Heal Yourself, The New Science of Healing. And just an FYI, the talk that I gave earlier this evening is based on Bruce Lipton's new work. Let me pull it out so you can actually see it. And I think there's a copy back there. So you can actually buy it while you're here. The book is here in the store, but this is my copy of the CD version, which is called Spontaneous Evolution, Our Positive Future, by Bruce Lipton and Steve. You've got glasses
sure.
on.
Steve Behrman.
Thanks. And this is, I really recommend this. It lays out a blueprint for how we can affect positive change in the world based on what we know.
I see. My sister suffers from bipolar, paranoia, depression, and now she's like very fragile. She's much younger than I am. And so I've been writing her letters and connecting with her again, and she's writing back, and she's even phoning me, and then I call her back. And I hear a change in her voice just because we've reconnected, but all the time I'm not with her now. I think of her with just incredible love in my heart. Where she used to be the brat, you know, she finally has told me she says, I was really a brat, wasn't I? And so now, I mean, that's a big healing for both of us right there on the spot. You know, makes me really want to love her now. But this is really very wonderful to hear. And I really appreciate your comment about the compassion, because that's really what I can do for her probably the most.
one of the characteristics of the work that I do is that it increases with distance. So it's actually more powerful to be done remotely than it is in person. So, without a surrogate, yes. Yeah. Sure.
One of the real positive things you can do about diagnoses like that is like work around your own fear around diagnoses, because like everybody's got that. You know, go and be crazy, like you've jumped off the edge, you're no longer normal. There's a new book that just came out. It's called Crazy Like Us. It's a really good book. It's a book, and it's talking about the exportation of American-style diagnosis of what's mad. I mean, madness is a culturally defined property. And a lot of bipolar gets defined after you become alcoholic, and then you get well, and then you get this bipolar diagnosis. And a lot of that gets related to liver disorder. But psychiatry doesn't look at it that way, but that's a Chinese look at it. So, I mean, it's cultural definition of what's mad. And I always joke about that. You know, the earth is bipolar, you know that. So we can't handle mood swings, I mean, really. Yeah, so there's really great organizations out there called, one of them is Mind Freedom. And it's kind of a different look, it's an American look about how do you deal with stuff. But I just want to offer that as like a reframing. It was a really powerful thing to do. And since you guys are sisters and you both saw each other as brat, I laughed because you guys are sisters and you guys are struggling. You got to compete in that little family dynamic that isn't a village. You know, so it's like a whole big, larger understanding about your stuff. If you look at yourself as a family and then as a whole culture, and look at it as a whole as American culture and a global culture. Right.
Thank you. It also brings to mind one of the findings of people who have multiple personalities. So this is how powerful your brain is, that when the person changes personalities, they can change their body from being having diseases, and just like that, not having the disease, and they can change their eye color as they change personalities also. So, yeah, pretty interesting things go on. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. Oh, and thank you so much to Clint and SoulFood and Jeff. And please support this wonderful venue. Grab something on your way out. Come back frequently. This is just a privilege to be here, and I'd like to make sure this place thrives. So thank you.
Every single soul is like a poem, you know.
That's right.
It's like words. No matter where I roam, well, we know every single soul is a poem. It's written on the back of God's hand. No matter where I roam, well, we know every single soul is a poem. It's written on the back of God's hand. You see moms and pops be copulating, planting seeds